graphics cards in the fucking world.
Yeah.
Like your average consumer has like.
I have a Vega. It's
like,
not really. Doesn't really count. It's a 1080.
Yeah, but your average consumer probably has like a 590 or 1066 Ti, which is like way worse.
Yeah, it's true.
That's like your median consumer graphics card, probably. Like the Vega is like.
I'd say like probably like I don't know all these fucking terms for AMDs, but I'd say like a GTX like 1050 is probably somewhere near the average.
No, that's too low.
I don't think so. Like
a 1050 is like a $70 card, Ryan.
I know, like most people haven't like upgraded their computer in like 3 or 4 years. Like I don't know.
Yeah, but
probably look at that Steam thing.
I would say like your median, that may be like the lower end. Like that's like probably like the low, because you literally can't get a worse card than that right now, pretty much on the consumer market. That's like literally the worst card that's probably still in production. 1050. I don't think that's the average card.
I wonder if Steam releases actual information on there.
They do have Steam. You can go find the
because
hardware survey.
Steam's got to be like above average for.
Like, let's see.
They probably have some sort of average hardware thing, but Steam hardware survey.
All right, we are live to break up this brilliant talk about Steam hardware, or Steam hardware surveys. Now that OBS has decided to let me use it. So today we are covering the electric car market and Tesla's dominance of it. So, do you guys want to just kick her off with your thoughts about this beforehand?
I'm definitely not going to kick off the thoughts before, because I had the least thoughts before and the worst thoughts before, I think.
I possibly had the most thoughts before, because this is just kind of a general topic of conversation gets thrown around. So I've heard a lot of takes on it without substantial factual backing.
Yeah, I bet. You too.
Well, I think most of them are borne out to be rooted in reality. The biggest thought before that I have for why the manufacturers, particularly North American, I don't know about the rest of the world, why they haven't heavily invested in the electric car game has to do with the lack of incentive for them to do it, because their big business model is dealerships, and it's gotten to the point like everyone goes to a dealership. You just don't even think that's weird, but like that is the car industry in North America, all centered around dealerships, and dealerships make their money off of selling new cars a little bit. Financing more than selling new cars, and even more than financing is maintenance on cars. And selling new cars will go down with electrics because they'll last longer, and maintenance will significantly go down with electrics because they're a much simpler, less easily damaged motor. Like, it won't have the required maintenance checkups that internal combustion has. So it won't make their dealerships happy when electrics become a large part of the car market.
I think we should just bracket it there for a second and say that, like, specifically that's our conversation topic, is why the bigger car manufacturers haven't really doubled down on electrics or ventured very far into electric vehicles. That's our kind of conversation specifically narrowed on that.
Yeah. Why is it Tesla, like a startup company from 2008, dominating that entire section of the industry?
Yeah, and you know, we're 12 years down the road, and they're, you know, most of the major car manufacturers haven't really put so much as a toe into the electric car market pretty much in 12 years that Tesla has kind of taken the market by the horns. So that just adds some context of why you're discussing that.
Okay, and then the other factor being a disincentive for them going into the electric car market is that it's new and untested. And so they would have to take on some risk with potential issues with an electric vehicle, which would require a lot more money than a company like Tesla on testing their products to make sure they don't upset consumers. And Tesla's pretty famous for having production hiccups. And it's kind of just a part of the process that the owners are used to at this point with Tesla vehicles. And something like that wouldn't really fly with a major manufacturer. So their cost of actually getting these cars to market would be higher, or the risk if they did something like Tesla does with hurting their own reputation by releasing a vehicle with defects would be higher because they have a reputation to lose. So they have little to no incentive to have electric vehicles based on their business model, and they're disincentivized versus Tesla because of the cost will be higher for an established company to go into the electric market just because of the reputational aspects. Then with Tesla, I believe the biggest reason I've heard discussed before researching it for why they were so wildly successful is basically that they have a group of investors that are not concerned with profits. They haven't made a profit for, I believe, the first 7 years of or they haven't made a consistent profit for the first 7 years they were running or something like that. And that's just a different type of mindset than the shareholders of the traditional automotive companies that expect to see a profit every single quarter. And they're going to get after the automotive companies if they don't see a profit. There were several automotive industry people that are quoted as saying they wish they ran a company that didn't have to turn a profit like Tesla because they could experiment a lot more. So it's kind of a different core of investors that Tesla attracts. And that's the biggest thing. And then I guess recently, as of news articles, I've seen that Toyota has a fancy solid-state battery they've been developing since about 2012, which made me think that they probably just didn't believe in lithium-ion technology as being capable of replacing internal combustion engines. But they think there was a chance with solid-state, and so that's where they put their money. And they've been able to continue developing electric motors because they use hybrids as their predominant version of electrified vehicles. So I think that about covers what I thought going into this.
Alrighty, I can add my own there. I think, for me at least, some of the major reasons I thought that Tesla was so dominant was the major manufacturers, like the big three in the States, and then the European ones and the Japanese ones. Like you had mentioned, Price, it's kind of, they want to see that quarter-to-quarter profits, and it's a complacency, right? It's an entirely different way of running business compared to something like Tesla, and if it's not broke, why fix it? If you're making good money year over year, posting record profits pretty consistently, why would you screw with a business model and risk damaging your brand reputation? Why would you risk dumping billions of dollars into something that might not go anywhere, that might drag you down, like drag down an entire R&D side of your company for years, and then, another technology like hydrogen fuel cells actually is the breakthrough, and you lose all that investment. So I thought that is probably the corporations, they were happy making what they were making. They had the experience and expertise, and so why would you stop? It's just, the other thing I thought there was, it's also, maybe you have some of the industry heads of the big companies, maybe it's a little bit old school and they're not really looking to innovate that hard, just because, again, that's very expensive. But you also might have people who are, they've built up 40 years worth of internal combustion engine experience, and they really don't want to move too far from that. They do sell or build some crazy concept cars, but they never really try anything very new and innovative. Something like ABS technology, anti-braking systems, those are from the 1920s. Like, it's an old piece of technology that, like, in its earliest form has been around a long time. So it's not, it's gone through evolutions, but it's not, it's not like that came out in 2012 or something, right? Or the 90s. So I think
the new evolutions are certainly
much better.
Predominantly in digital technology, like the automatic braking and lane assist and all those sort of, like, a consumer will notice the difference if you tell them it's there, but it's not really a big deal.
It's not a complete overhaul, right, of the entire way your company builds its product. Like, the electric car versus a gas car it's such a massive changeover that I think a lot of companies might just say, they're not looking to innovate, flip the entire thing on its head, right? Like a huge corporation is really slow moving. It's very, there's a lot of ossification going on, and so I think that it might have just been too much of a, it's just not worth the time, and it's not even feasible to move that quick. So, you get a small upstart like Tesla that's able to just be really light on its feet and move quickly to what they see as like an emerging market.
As they like to say, move fast and break things.
I
believe is always the industry term these days.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man.
That's it for me.
The only thing I would kind of expand on there, or my thoughts, was like in terms of the branding. Like, I thought before coming into this, like one of the big reasons Tesla's successful and that the other manufacturers can't compete is Tesla basically sells their vehicles for a premium because they're electric, they're more expensive to produce, and they have more technology there, and they just sell them. Your average Tesla vehicle is worth a lot more than a comparable combustion engine from Toyota or any other large manufacturer. And Tesla can do that basically due to branding, and that is very hard for an established company. Again, going back to what Price was saying, like, it's how do you, Toyota is not going to be seen as a cool car ever. Like, it's just they're the boring, efficient, stalwarts of quality, right? Like, nobody is going to buy their car to be cool, whereas Tesla can market themselves that way because they're just starting and they only have a few cars on the lineup, so they can market themselves as like the cool new techie, environmental friendly, but sporty whatever alternative. Their whole brand can be that, whereas like Toyota can't shift their whole brand just to sell electric vehicles. So
I think good supporting evidence for that is that Ford's first electric car is a Mustang, because that is their cool sporty brand, and they're going for that sort of aesthetic.
Exactly. So I think because electric vehicles come at a premium, I was thinking like the branding has to be there for people to actually pay the premium, and traditional car manufacturers who rely on like quality or affordability just cannot shift their whole brand just to cater to the electric car market. It's just not possible. So that was my kind of thinking of why it was a difficult problem for established brands to kind of crack. So I think we can kind of wrap it up there for our unless you guys have anything to add.
Nope.
I think that pretty much covers it.
So then we can go into the context of it all. I think people will understand that Tesla is this bit of a meme company, but it's huge. That I think is the one thing that's seared into the public conscious. And just to give people a bit of a scale, Tesla is worth $610 billion roughly, which is more than the next top 6 automakers combined, and that's including Ford, it's including Chrysler, it's including all of Toyota. It's the next biggest one is Toyota at $210 billion for market cap, and so that sounds pretty crazy, but it's also even more crazy knowing that Tesla made and sold about 500,000 cars this past year, and the other car companies will sell 10 times that at least. Like,
Also, Toyota sells the most cars in the world, and they sold 10.7 million in 2019. I don't know if they're on track to have higher than that this year, but it'd probably be similar. So roughly about 20 times the production of Tesla.
now
And
granted that,
their market cap is 1/3 that of Tesla's.
and you have, like, yes, okay, Teslas are going to be worth a lot more, but they're not worth 20 times more, right? So it's just, Tesla has become this insane, like, behemoth of technology, and it's a very odd, it's just an odd place for the entire industry to be at, where this relatively new upstart company from 2008 that just built a prototype roadster then is now worth almost a third of the entire car market in the world. Like, it's, and so this thesis of this entire podcast is, why aren't these companies, these other big manufacturers, trying to build into the car, get into the EV market? Because it's, it's clearly working for Tesla where it's worth this much. So we just, as for some other context, it's like, if you're looking at the other EV sales, Tesla owns 18% of the sales for across all electrics. Like, Tesla is absolutely dominant in it. So you would think that these big car companies would be at least trying to cash in on some of this, but they're not. Like, they're not.
Well, and to add to that, like, the Nikola, which is basically a startup that was just founded recently that promised to bring a electric truck to market, but has nothing more than concepts, hit $25 billion in market cap. So, you'd think that maybe Toyota or, any other large manufacturer might think like, let's just throw something at the wall and see if it sticks. And worst case scenario, we create some buzz, we create some hype, we create some interest in our company, and pump the stock price, and attract some investment, right? So it is a bit of a curious problem why none of these much, if you look at revenue, much larger companies haven't tried to siphon some of that revenue and put it into the EV market.
Yeah, so I think that's some good context. Let's just jump right into it.
So the first thing when I looked into this that surprised me was just how small the electric vehicle market is. As we've already discussed, Tesla sells 500,000 cars a year. And I think that's the obvious reason that jumps out at me as to why major companies haven't put more into electric vehicles. Because you would put in all of this effort, take all of this risk on board, and at best, you're talking maybe 10% of your vehicle sales would be electric if you manage to be equivalently successful to Tesla.
Which is very low. Like, that's a pretty low chance that you'll be there.
Like, just to put some further numbers on it, like, they estimate by the end of 2020 about 3% of the cars on the road will be EV.
That's 3% of passenger vehicles, and I think it's 1% of global vehicle market is EV.
Of new sales, I think, is about 1%, but I think about 3%. They expect 3% of the cars on the road to be EV. So it's just not a even noticeable amount of the car market yet. So. I mean, obviously Tesla's market cap and their investors are speculative, and it's purely kind of based on, it's going to have to be based on growth. There's no way that Tesla at its current capacity is ever going to be worth what it's worth right now. It obviously is the whole expectation is they're going to be the biggest car manufacturer, and a lot of people say, oh, Tesla's not a car manufacturer. They're a tech company because they have a lot of patents and proprietary technology that they can leverage.
Mostly open sourced. Yes.
Well, some of it, but they do have other things that are theirs, and so you could say, well, they're going to make money off of basically software as a service for their cars, basically subscription cars. I don't, like there's a whole bunch of theories, but I think you can't get there without them increasing their sales massively.
So I did find some numbers for that. I'm not sure if either of you looked into that either, but the largest forecast that I saw for the electrical vehicle market was that the share would reach 40% by 2030. So that'd go up 37%, I guess, from 2020. And that Tesla itself was its forecast, its goal for 2030 is to produce 20 million vehicles. So that would be a 40 times increase. So they definitely don't think they're a tech company. They are in the business of making cars, or at least in the business of telling people they're going to make cars.
Well, and again, even there, they would have to make sell at least 20 million cars to, kind of justify their current valuation in 2030, right? Like that's like a minimum number. It seems, which it seems like a ludicrous number to start with, but I mean, it seems like the minimum.
I'd say this seems like what people are investing as though it's a certainty that this will happen. Like it's the only way these sort of investments make logical sense is if you're certain that Tesla is going to reach these extremely lofty goals.
Yeah, so I also did look into a little bit. I didn't look at the 2030 numbers, but I did. There was a report by Deloitte, and they stated that there's going to be something like 21 million cars produced by 2025, 21 million electric vehicles produced by 2025, I believe was the date. And their estimate was actually that maybe an overproduction of 14 million vehicles based on consumer demand.
Yeah.
Essentially, the promises from car manufacturers about electric vehicle production is going to overproduce electric vehicles compared to demand over the next several years. So that's not a great... I mean, forecast. Obviously, yeah, it's all forecast. It's all based on, obviously, a numerous number of assumptions that could hold to be completely inaccurate, but it's not a great starting point for something like Tesla.
Sorry. I was just going to comment on your point there with the forecasts. I'm not sure if you had to add to that.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I think that all speaks to why maybe someone, big car manufacturers are hesitant to kind of jump into the deep end on EVs when, it just doesn't seem like the demand's there. That, obviously, I'm sure they would love to, car manufacturers are only going to build what they can sell. And if they're, I'm sure they're operating off of better information than your average person is going to have. Your average consumer is not going to understand their internal, kind of marketing, and they're going to know that the demand's not there. And that's corroborated by someone like Deloitte doing that report. That they're going to be hesitant when there's just not enough demand.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is that when you start looking into sort of forecasts, and with 2030 kind of being when electric vehicles are projected to almost be half of the car market, it almost leads to, we could have done this whole set of research with an opposite thesis and been probably as accurate as why are all of the manufacturers jumping on electric vehicles in 2020 when it's such a small segment of the vehicle market, because there's that question also can be asked based on these sort of projections. in that, is it even worth the investment that is currently going into it by these major manufacturers?
Yeah, so we should probably note that. I think you got the numbers there, price, but I saw this as well. Like these major manufacturers, so we're talking Toyota, GM, Volkswagen, they're dumping tens of billions of dollars into it now. At least they're claiming that that's what they're doing. So it's interesting to see that this has just now in 2020, and I think probably some of it came in 2019 as well. But like I remember GM was saying, what was it, $23 billion or something like that. Ford's got $11 billion. Volkswagen's also got some tens of billions of dollars. So I think that is a really good point, saying now why is this randomly happening now, even though that
not randomly, but I'm just saying that it's at least as valid of a question to ask the inverse of what we asked based on the numbers that we've found.
Not randomly, but
and I think it's a good segue into what the actual large manufacturers are doing, because we did quite a bit of research on that.
Mm-hmm.
So with, as you were saying, with the GM and the other North American manufacturers, GM wants to have 12 electric vehicles models in the next year or two, and they've invested a ton into batteries. So they're going to come out with a Hummer, once again, the sporty, high-end, energetic brand, that's going to have a 200 kilowatt hour battery in it, which is double anything on the road right now. And they are claiming that their batteries are going to be under $100 per kilowatt hour, which there's a little room for fudging the numbers on that, but $100 per kilowatt hour
is that USD?
Kind of, yeah, that's USD. That's kind of the industry shorthand for saying that it won't be a significant price difference from a internal combustion of equivalent power. So you'll you'll not have the price markup for the sole purpose of being electric. So the downside will solely be the range that electrics still haven't quite caught up to gas on, and charging times.
Yeah,
GM's battery tech is pretty much there about the same ballpark as Tesla.
I'm not gonna lie, I would definitely own an EV Hummer. That would be sick as fuck. It'd be so fun.
Well, and I think out of all the large manufacturers, Volkswagen's, their claims are the most aggressive. They've changed. They've kind of moved the goalposts a little bit, but at one point they were claiming at least 1 million electric cars sold by 2025 on a yearly basis. They're developing. Toyota is also doing this, but basically like a kind of a modifiable electric car platform. So basically a kind of core part of the vehicle that can be modified for different models of vehicle. So you can put an SUV on top of it, or sedan, or whatever you want.
It's a general platform that you swap out.
Yeah, a general. So there's this called MEB. I know Toyota's doing a very similar thing. So that it basically allows for rapid model development. So you can make a whole range of vehicles quickly, much more, and in parallel, much more efficiently than doing it one at a time. And their new kind of claim is that 2026 is the final year that the company will develop a combustion platform vehicle. That's a little bit like vague on purpose, I think, just saying like, so they can develop in 2026 a combustion vehicle, meaning they can sell it indefinitely.
I didn't really look into Volkswagen. So when they say combustion, do they mean internal combustion, or do they mean combustion is internal combustion or hybrid?
They mean internal combustion. I think that includes hybrids. Yeah. So the 2026 would be the last year that they would develop a model. It doesn't stop them from, it doesn't bind them to not selling going forward, but develop a combustion So anything with a combustion engine is that's the way they worded it. And they have 70 models of electric vehicles planned, is what they said. Again, I think we should mention that a lot of this is going to be PR, fluff essentially, where they're going to get kind of branding points just for saying this stuff. That I think that going back to what Price was saying about the opposite thesis, that is why I do think it is interesting. Our original thesis is interesting because if you actually look at what's available, that's where I think that our thesis really comes through. Like, you can not buy a fully electric Toyota in Canada right now.
So I have a list.
I think there's one in China.
Yeah. So I have a list of this. It's like there's only 18 models roughly of electric cars that can be purchased in the States at all, like pure EVs. Four from Tesla, one from Porsche, two from Beamers. Nissan's got a couple, Hyundai, Chevy, Honda, Jaguar. It's like most of them have like a token electric car. It's only really Tesla that has anything that remotely resembles what you would expect a lineup to be for a car company.
Even Toyota doesn't actually have a token. Like that's why I think our thesis is like, you'd think that I guess the kind of the better question is like, why don't these companies have something like, they don't have to bet big, but even bet small. Like Toyota didn't even bet small on electrics at this point. And I think it is kind of interesting that they haven't even put their toe in the water in the North American market with electrics as the biggest car manufacturer in the world. I do actually kind of know after looking into it, the reasoning essentially seems like Toyota was basically hates electrics in their current state. Their chairman, I'm going to butcher this, Uchi Yamada, basically stated that Toyota doesn't pursue electrics at this point in time because they're not convenient enough. They lack infrastructure, and the charging combined with the lack of range is a non-starter, and they think that consumers will not adopt electric vehicles in their current state. And as Price had mentioned, that's why they were pursuing the solid state battery, because it would solve both of those problems, because solid states charge much quicker and they have much better energy density, allowing for longer range electric vehicles. But the other thing that I think we forgot to mention, or should mention, is that Toyota actually bet big on hydrogen fuel cell. They released back in, I think it was 2017, in the North American market, a full hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, and they basically didn't sell any. And they were trying to work with, especially in California, with the state government to get hydrogen fueling stations. So they basically saw hydrogen as being the replacement, because it was both. It did meet the two requirements that they saw, which was the range and the convenience factor of being able to. You could fuel a hydrogen vehicle just like you can a traditional gas combustion engine. So it had none of the drawbacks of electric. So they thought that would be the way forward, and it just never went anywhere in North America, especially.
I think as we're discussing Toyota, you can't really say they bet big on hybrids, because that's about the most pragmatic choice you could go with. But that's what they've invested into in reality. Like they're of electric and hydrogen, they definitely lean towards hydrogen, but predominantly they're leaned towards hybrid, and seem to be leaning towards hybrid for the foreseeable future, because their sales plan states that by 2025 they intend to sell half of their vehicles as electrified, as they call it, which means either hybrid or electric. And since they don't really have any plan that I could see to have more than a few models of electric vehicle by 2025, and they don't plan to have their solid state battery in their electric vehicles until 2025, that means that they pretty much intend to have half of their vehicles being sold in 2025 being hybrid.
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, that's hybrids are really not the same, obviously.
Yeah, it's not like a bet. It's basically a surefire evolution of internal combustion.
It's like kind of a double down on fuel efficient combustions, right? Because there's all sorts of other things that go into fuel efficient combustions, which I think Toyota has also pursued. So yeah, it does. I mean that is a very pragmatic choice to go for the higher efficiency internal combustion because again they seem to emphasize the convenience factor, and they just don't. It seems like the company culture just doesn't see electrics as like a viable alternative in their current state with the charging times and range limitations, which
I honestly think there's not actually going to be that off base. I think one of the reasons it's not been adopted as much as it has been is likely just due to charging issues. I think that, like, when I was looking at research, that seemed to be like a real consumer concern.
I do think that factors in because you do have to install. But I think I would venture that the biggest drawback to electrics at this point in time is just they're fundamentally more expensive overall in terms of upfront costs. Like you just cannot buy
right
a electric vehicle for, like, if you buy a comparable sedan, it's going to be like 30 to 40% more expensive, at least for an electric version. And I think some evidence, in my opinion, that it kind of comes down to money is, say, somewhere like Norway, which heavily subsidizes electric vehicles. Currently, they have 37% of their sales are electric, and they're one of the worst markets on the planet for electric vehicles because obviously
It's cold.
Yeah,
it's cold. So half the year their electric vehicles don't work as well, basically, or don't work very well, and they still have high electric car sales because they've incentivized them and made them cost comparative to internal combustion. So I would be surprised to see, or I would think that if costs were more comparable, you really would see a huge leap in sales.
Oh yeah.
And speaking about costs, with that $100 per kilowatt, where they start to think that costs will become comparable, I've seen projections, not from either GM or Tesla, who both claim they'll have it sooner, that the general cost of lithium-ion batteries will reach that level around 2023, 2024.
They'll reach the $100 per kilowatt hour.
So yeah, and that's where that $100 per kilowatt hour is where they think you'll start reaching a similar cost to internal combustions. But
what's the current? Did you see anything on what
the current cost is $156 per kilowatt hour for?
So that would be a significant reduction and what was an average Tesla? You're saying the Hummer is what, 200 kilowatt hours that's planned?
Yeah, and Tesla's, I think their usual models are around 75, 80 kilowatt hours.
So that right there, just on battery costs, would be thousands and thousands of dollars saved, essentially. If prices do drop. Yeah, that's huge. That would be huge for the value comparison, because I honestly do think, like, you're obviously not going to be able to sell a less convenient product that's also more expensive.
The only thing I've seen that suggests a lack of faith in prices dropping by, let's be conservative and say 2025, is actually also a statement from Toyota that they're dissatisfied with the government of Japan intending to end internal combustion sales by 2030, because they don't believe that there'll be a consumer-friendly, like, vehicle out, low-price vehicle out. They think that it will inhibit lower income people from buying vehicles in Japan if they can't buy internal combustion, if they have to buy either hybrid or electric.
See, I'm always skeptical of something like that, just because that.
I think Toyota is. I don't think it's bad to be too pragmatic, but they are probably the most pragmatic auto company from the sort of things that I've seen them say in their attitudes towards innovation. They do innovate, but they are very slow and steady.
Well, you don't become the actual biggest auto manufacturer in the world without being sensible.
Another statement I've seen that was attributed to a Toyota engineer that was unnamed was that their supply of batteries was another consideration early in their electric vehicle planning as to whether to go towards electric vehicles or hybrids as their main focus in the future. And they effectively didn't think they could get access to enough lithium-ion batteries to produce enough electric vehicles to make it make sense to have that as their focus, which seems accurate based on Tesla having effectively tapped out the lithium-ion battery market in, I believe, 2018, and they have the same supplier as Toyota will be using, or is using, for their hybrids, which is Panasonic, although Tesla wants to take their battery production in-house.
Gotta go private.
Well, that will save them. That's basically what Tesla's banking on to get under the $100 per kilowatt hour, is bringing everything in-house and saving money. And Elon Musk is a big fan of that in general, because that's what he did with SpaceX. And they brought the price of rockets down, which is a very different market. But by bringing it all in-house, they brought the price of rockets down, I believe, 30 or 40% over what it would have cost to buy all the parts and put it together.
Interesting. So
yeah, Elon Musk likes the integrated, build everything. Like his ideal world, Tesla builds all of its own parts and puts everything together itself to save money.
Which is very different than the traditional car market, for sure.
So, interesting. My research kind of led to, like, I was looking into, like, well, why is the electric car market, not booming? It's just kind of starting out in 2020 when, these things have been around a lot longer. And that kind of led me into the 90s. And GM actually wound up building an electric roadster in the 1980s. And California was looking to... California has horrible air pollution. And they were looking to get they passed some mandate regulation to force auto companies to build EVs. Like, so they had to, it was like 10% of all your vehicle sales had to be an EV in California. And GM, with their, their new piece of technology, they wound up squashing this they call it, I can't remember, it was like the...
EV1, I think.
This was the EV1, yeah, but it was a fascinating read. Essentially, like small-scale electric motors and cars could have been very widely available and spread around, at least in, like, more urban centers, since, like, the last 30 years, really. But it seems like the auto companies... They went after California because California passed that mandate that you have to eventually sell 10% of your 10% of your stock sold in California had to be EV by the time, like, 2005, I think it was, and that pissed all the automakers off, even GM, who was looking to market this new car they built. But one of the big reasons it seems like the big auto manufacturers wound up fighting back in the 90s and early 2000s against this, it was the California Air Resources Board mandate. One of the reasons is if auto companies, most of their stuff is outsourced, so what they specialize in building is powertrains. So that's the transmission and the motor, the internal combustion motor, and everything else is outsourced. So if you switch over to something like electric, you no longer have any sort of competitive advantage. And that's one of the reasons, actually, his name is Mark. He's the co-founder of Tesla. He was saying that one of the reasons that companies, like the big audio manufacturers, are not a fan of going over to electric is they don't own huge sources of what they actually put into their vehicles. So if you replace the powertrain, then they actually have to start from scratch. Like that's a massive problem for them. So it's much more economical for them to not go down that route at all, at least for the time being. Now it looks like they're kind of being forced to by the market and by the governments, but I found that really interesting that was kind of one of the guiding forces behind Tesla. Was they noticed that and they said, okay, let's not go down that road. Let's build it all ourselves so we don't get caught in a situation like this.
The only thing to remain aware of when discussing electric vehicles in the 80s and 90s is that the battery technology was absolutely trash tier, garbage, useless, and you maybe commute around a urban center.
That's all they were for, yes.
Like, what we're talking about $100 per kilowatt hour as being competitive with internal combustion. In 2010, I believe was the date, your price was over $1,000 per kilowatt hour. And so it's gone down 10 times, or if it goes down 10 times from 2010, it'll start to be competitive. So the economics of making an electric that would compete with a gas vehicle just were not there until basically 5 years in the future from now.
To be fair, I think you can make the argument that that's a little bit like, if there would have been a push for electric, I'm sure there would also been a bigger push in terms of improving batteries and lowering the price of batteries at the same time.
Well,
you know what I mean?
This is one of the things that I noticed is, some Toyota says, well, the infrastructure is not there, so we don't really, you don't have charging stations all over the place. It's like, well, Tesla went and built their own damn charging stations. It's not like it can't be done. It's
but not everyone's just got funny money to throw around like Tesla does.
Not everybody was broke back then when they started doing that.
I think that kind of goes back to our main thesis is why haven't the big manufacturers jumped in? I think a lot of it is just a timing thing where, Toyota and Honda and GM and all of them want to jump in, but they want to time it. They don't want to be the first mover who has to kind of subsidize the whole move over to electric. They don't want to be the ones that have to, pay the money to the lawyers to get, lobby regulators to do X, Y, and Z. They don't want to be the ones, spending money to install charging stations. They don't want to be the ones doing X, Y, or Z that cost money and cuts into profit. They'd much rather wait for all that, the road to be paved for them, and then just release a car that,
plugs right into the system, right?
And they also want to do it early enough that they're not missing out on establishing themselves as kind of like a marquee electric car brand. But they also don't want to be the ones again eating. So, and a lot of these are kind of established blue chip older companies that quarter to quarter profits matter a lot to them. So they're going to play it safe. That's their incentive. That's what their shareholders want them to do.
You can't screw with the quarterly dividend.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our research did kind of bear that out, where they are doing the PR announcements now about, Toyota, trying to get their brand associated with electric vehicles, trying to get the legwork there for the branding, but they're not actually, putting too much real money into putting cars on the road just yet. They're waiting for the kind of the point to tip over where it starts to be profitable for them to sell a fairly substantial electrical lineup.
They don't want to be the first movers, but they want to be the second movers. That's a pretty standard business tactic, right?
An interesting thing to think about is that when you're talking charging stations and infrastructure and how nobody wants to build them, and Tesla basically went out and built them because they're Tesla and they just don't worry about these things.
Just do it.
We could have lived in a world, quite possibly, if Musk believed in hydrogen over electric, where Tesla built hydrogen fueling stations and built hydrogen infrastructure and was the hydrogen car company. And like, obviously there's probably business considerations that Musk took into account on electrics, and he figured electrics were the way to go. But I could totally see a world where a company like Tesla had done the same thing but with hydrogen, and now everyone was pivoting towards hydrogen.
Well, and I think, I don't know, it's easy with hindsight, but I think Musk was right. I mean, Toyota and Honda both did try to do the hydrogen to a certain extent, and they basically got no traction with getting infrastructure.
They ran into the chicken and egg problem, and they didn't, like, Tesla just solved their own problem.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
The cars and the chargers.
Well, but the problem with that is that, like, Tesla could build literally dick, and you can still charge your car. You know what I mean? Like, you can plug your car into an electric outlet in your fucking house. It's slow as shit, but you can do it. And you can also spend whatever, I don't know how much it is, $800, $1,200 and get a fast charger installed in your house, like a fast charge outlet. It's not cheap, but private electric outlets, you cannot go and spend money and get a hydrogen fuel cell station installed in your house.
That's a good point. The infrastructure would have had to be much more substantial than what Tesla put in for charging.
Yeah, you can't kind of limp by with, slow chargers here and there and blah blah blah. Like for hydrogen fuel cell, you really have to brute force it, and so
it's a way bigger deal than
putting. Yeah, Musk definitely had an easier challenge with electrics because everywhere is going to have electricity. You might not have the fast chargers, but you still have a fucking wall outlet, so you can make things, and for half the people buying a Tesla, a wall outlet is probably enough, right? Like, they maybe put in 30 kilometers on their car a day max. Like, they don't need a fast charger.
Just like a 240 volt wall would probably do more than most people use their Teslas for.
Exactly, like half the garages in the country are going to have a suitable solution pre-made and going there, which is not the same situation. Hydrogen fuel cells.
There's one crazy company that's claiming to have some sort of garage hydrogen production, but I think that they're actually crazy. They don't seem substantial to me.
Well, and
they're going to cause a huge fire at some point.
Exactly. Like, hydrogen is just, that's the other thing, is like, you have to figure out how to like store it properly and everything. It is like gasoline, where it's an explosive substance that you can't just, even if you could feasibly technology wise make a garage hydrogen solution, I'm sure that's gonna have a bunch of cascading effects with house insurance and all that you're not gonna find with.
Yeah, the legal ramifications of something like that is gonna be pretty crazy.
A juiced outlet that you have to use for your whatever dryer. I can't remember. I think dryers run off the same.
It's the 240.
Yeah, most of our dryers are 240 in North America.
Yeah, so again, like it's nothing new. It's nothing. It's nothing new. It's nothing that can't be fit into the existing infrastructure and framework that everyone deals with already.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Have you missed anything that we want to cover on our main points or our main research?
Well, I kind of wanted to bring up, and just didn't jump in at the time, that the most substantial data on models of electric vehicles coming out seems to be Ford. And by 2022, so their 2022 lineup is supposed to include 16 electric vehicles and 24 hybrid vehicles. Whereas GM's more like loose on what year their models are supposed to be coming out. And Chrysler is very loose on when their electric vehicles are coming out and what they'll look like. Although, interestingly, Chrysler is trying to partner with Foxconn, and it seems like that's going to happen, which would mean that basically Foxconn, which is known for electronics, smartphones, that sort of stuff, would be supplying large amounts of material, and Chrysler, I believe, would be in charge of the actual putting everything together into a vehicle expertise.
And well, that's generous.
Well, it's Fiat, Chrysler, and soon to be Peugeot, so they've got to know something about making vehicles between the three of them.
Well, maybe between the two of them. Let's just leave Chrysler out of that conversation. Yeah, and I guess the one thing I would like to mention, going back to like the value comparison, is it does seem like with subsidies, electric vehicles are still not quite competitive. And I was seeing a lot of mention of basically there seems to be like the early adopter consumer market that is made up of like tech people and green credentials. And I remember, this is just a random story. Someone posted, there's this this social media app that someone posted about their Tesla had a what was the problem with it? Their Tesla had some sort of problem, and then someone mentioned Teslas don't have that, and then they were forced to admit that they had a Prius hybrid, and I was like, big shame, because they had a combustion vehicle. It was just a Prius hybrid, and it wasn't fully electric, and so they're being shamed on the social media platform in Silicon Valley. So it does seem like Tesla has captured a certain like 500,000 vehicles at like their premium rates. That may not be sustainable because there is that certain segment of the population that is willing to, although if you take a look over at Apple, maybe it's a sustainable kind of business practice to have this kind of exclusivity and like coolness about your product and sell it to the general public, even though that doesn't really seem exclusive, but that people feel like it is. And so that is not going to be sustainable for other manufacturers, obviously. So they have to get the overall value of the vehicle much higher to make the transition to tens of millions of sales. It's just,
they absolutely have to drop it down a lot. Like you're gonna have to build out the entire market base of the people who can afford $25,000 cars, $15,000 cars. You're not going to be able to keep selling the $70,000 cars, $60,000 cars. It eventually will cap out. But
all you've got to do is convince the banks to give more people loans to buy those cars.
Oh my God, the subprime lending.
Teslas are an investment that they don't depreciate; they appreciate in value.
Well, and once you get the Tesla app, you'll be able to send it off to do its work while you're at work. It'll be on the road, being a driverless taxi on the Tesla app, making you money. So really, you're making money when you buy a Tesla. You just haven't made it yet, but you're going to.
It's appreciating and it's paying dividends.
Yeah.
It's better than a stock. It's better than stocks.
The best, speaking of Tesla consumers, the best anecdote I've seen is, I believe it was 2019 and 2020 Consumer Reports. Tesla's had the highest rate of owner-reported malfunctions and other problems by a significant margin. They also had the highest rate of consumer satisfaction by a significant margin.
Yeah.
So people have tons of problems with their Teslas, and they still love them.
Which, again, that is, I think it works for Tesla, and works as, it seems to be working. They seem to be keeping the sales growing and getting cars out the door. But again, I don't think that is a industry-wide adoptable strategy. So it makes sense that someone like Toyota, who prides themselves on their, reliability and lack of imperfections and just overall best quality out the door is never going to go that route, right? Like they're not going to half-ass some electric car to market without doing the due diligence, and they can't, right? Like you were saying in your thoughts before the podcast, they can't afford to tarnish their the rest of their market segments with bad outcomes just to cater to the small electric car market.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's true. It's not worth brand damage. It's not worth mucking up your business formulation to go after what is right now still a really tiny chunk of the market. The one thing that I would like to say is I really do think that we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, but I would say 5, you're going to start seeing more and more governments really cramming down regulation that is going to push car companies. I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing these massive investments from these car companies. I think they do see the writings on the wall that the whole right now, the green revolution it's starting. I think it's more and more I think it's just going to, while it hasn't completely taken over, I think it's definitely going to in Canada for sure, but in the States as well. It's just going to happen. The governments will just say, well, these are these really stringent regulations, and if you don't like it, go to hell. You're gonna have to match what we say. And I think that is going to, a place like Deloitte is saying, there might be a massive over production. I think these regulations and governments it'll be messy, but I think it's going to push a lot of the manufacturing in this direction and a lot of the buying.
Another thing I saw that builds on your point there with governments is unions actually are cluing in that the governments are going for green incentives and they don't want to be left behind. So in Canada, both Ford and GM, the unions have pressured to have commitments from Ford and GM to build a certain number of billions of dollars of electric vehicles in Canada. And Ford had a deal last year, and GM just recently came to a deal with the union in Canada. And I just thought that was pretty much goes to show that it's real, these sort of commitments that they're willing to write billion-dollar deals with the unions that they will produce an electric car model in here, and this many units, this many $1 billion of electric cars will be produced in these Canadian factories.
Well, and one other thing to add on to that, in terms of country leaders in electric, China leads the way. So
yeah,
they're ahead of the curve in basically just subsidizing and ramming down electric vehicles down people's throats, whether they want them or not. And they do it, again, mostly it seems for air quality and congestion. They've also and they've also done the same with their they're also the leader in electrified buses. So it does show that there's not the technology is at a point where it's feasible to change over to electric. Again, it's the value, right? And I think another point to mention is if you go on the Tesla site, you can select the purchase price, and then it'll show you the savings, and it always says fuel savings over 6 years. And I think that's another value consideration that is just consumers are obviously have terrible time scale of money, and they massively they're going to massively underestimate fuel cost savings or massively discount it in their value calculations, even if those savings are real, right? So if fossil fuels continue to get carbon taxes levied on them that increase, I mean that's happening in Canada and will probably continue to happen and ramp up. That value equation will also get tilted by that pretty heavily, where it might cost you $175 to fill up your gas tank, and $12 to charge your vehicle. But consumers are probably going to take a while to adjust to that reality, and they may never actually make the mathematically correct calculation, just because, just like consumers often get, kind of tricked in by like low monthly payments, but with terrible financing deals. It's, people aren't rational, and they might discount those savings that happen over a delayed period of time in favor of just sticker price. So
I would definitely say that that's a big driving force of how the car market actually works.
That also made something just click for me, especially with regards to China and how they care about their air quality, is that in Europe, for example, one of their big pushes was for fuel efficiency before electrics. And so that led to a lot of diesel internal combustions. And then those diesel internal combustions put pollution into the atmosphere that is demonstrated to be carcinogenic. So then they tried to limit that. Volkswagen got around it. And all these problems, basically you're treating people for cancer 60 years down the line because of people driving diesel vehicles in your cities. So for a country like China, for sure, they probably got the numbers to figure out their healthcare cost savings if they can actually get internal combustions off the road.
Yeah, I do think China is an interesting example to always return to when talking about these things, because they don't have to follow the rules, so to speak, of democracies, and they can do things that are a lot more long range thinking, and they'll brute force them through. So you can always kind of use China as it's not perfect, obviously, but they can be kind of a barometer for maybe what's like the long-term, stable, best solution, or better solution, because they get to just take in the numbers and then dictate what happens. Obviously, not as easy to do in places that aren't totalitarian shitholes, but still, like, there is that is the benefit. So I think it would actually be not a bad idea for other jurisdictions to always keep an eye on what China's doing and learn from that. And it has produced its failures as well, right? But it is always interesting to look at that other system and see what it's doing and what it's producing in terms of solutions, and seeing if it actually pans out to be better than what we're doing.
Yeah, I'm going to be watching the Chinese scene, I think, with some interest.
One last thing that we didn't touch on, and it's like kind of it's tangentially related, is that Toyota's working pretty hard on putting solar panels on cars, and they've got it to the point right now their prototype can go 30 miles a day on solar panels, which is obviously not being in a garage or anything. But this could be a kind of a big deal in the future, because we're moving towards robo-taxis, which will be on the road in the sun all day long. So these solar panels could actually become quite commonplace with things like robo-taxis.
It would have. I don't disagree. Other than, like, it would have to be very cost effective, because that's only going to be, for say a robo-taxi, that's only going to be like 10% of its power.
Yeah, like you're saving 30 miles of charging.
Yeah, so that's going to be like 5 or 10% of its use for the day, right? So you'd have to.
If a robo-taxi drives 1 million miles or 2 million miles in its lifespan, it adds up.
But what I mean is, it would have to increase the car cost by a fairly small margin for taxi companies to do it, right? Because if it saves them, a few percentages a day in terms of recharging rate, but is like $7-8 grand up front, I just don't think the math works there. Although, and I do think it is funny, like, Toyota's doing that when they said, electric vehicles that, like something like Tesla that has like 400-kilometer range, it's just not convenient, quote unquote. Like,
but this isn't like this would be a supplement to your regular electric vehicle.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, that's nice and all, but it's just, you know what I mean? Like, it kind of runs antithetical to their convenience. Like that's a pretty big investment on something that wouldn't increase convenience. I guess if you did it in conjunction with the solid state battery, then I mean it's just a bonus, I guess.
Yeah. I just think that's it's kind of out there because no one else really seems to be looking heavily into solar panels other than Toyota, but it's also really interesting. And for instance, like the solar panels they're using are 50% better than the consumer average right now, which is pretty shocking.
And I mean, I'd just be curious to the math of like, why wouldn't you just coat your roof with that and then?
That's what I see as being the consumer market is when you get your garage set up, like, and if batteries are going down in price, maybe it ends up making sense for governments to subsidize putting a solar panel on people's garage to charge a battery pack that's in their garage that charges their vehicle at night rather than boosting the whole energy grid. Maybe it doesn't, but I mean, solar panels are pretty impressive these days, and I always sleep on it. So,
yeah, maybe a future topic would be solar, just as an expansion, because I do think that would be very interesting to. I know that solar is getting a lot better, and it's getting better quickly and much more cost effective quickly, but I don't know what that means. You know what I mean? Like I don't have a baseline. I just know it's getting better. Is there anything?
I covered everything I researched.
Yeah, I don't have much to say beyond that. I don't know if
I did like the only other things that I had brought up too much, but there was some pretty heavy allegations against in the early 2000s against automakers for squashing EVs. And there was a lot of speculation that it was oil companies mixed with like GM and whatnot trying to maintain the profits that, you know, did away with the EV market. There was a pretty famous documentary called "Who Killed the Electric Car," and the whole allegation was, oh, you know, it's consumers that don't really think that it's this great, but it's also the oil manufacturers and the automakers who don't want this because, you know, corporate greed, right? But I do think that given like the limitations of EVs, especially back then, it's just, I do think that value proposition really is still not there, like we've been discussing this whole time. So I thought it was interesting to go through all of what we were learning and then went through that documentary and just see it from another perspective. But it definitely is there's definitely was quite a bit of fight back from the oil companies against EVs, and I think they're still at it. A lot of the tactics that they were using, you know, that cigarette companies used against regulators and whatnot, the oil industry used against EV makers. So
I could definitely see that, and it would be something where, like, all it would take is like them delaying, like, you know, maybe we could have had $100 kilowatt hour batteries 20 years ago, or 30. You know what I mean, like,
or even 10 years ago, like, you know, 10 years ahead of schedule, 12 years ahead of schedule, or something like that.
Exactly. So I could definitely see there being significant sabotage of the technology required to make, like, my guess would be EVs were never at the stage where the technology was there to replace combustion engines, but that probably is large. Yeah, there could be a large component of that lack of technological advancement being driven by sabotage by oil companies and even car companies themselves.
Yeah, that was kind of the allegation in this video, because it was one of the more famous ones, one of the more famous like green documentaries that have been made over the last 30 years. So, well, this one was 15 years ago, but I thought it was interesting to see that, you know, we really could have been actually a lot further ahead than we are right now with Tesla and the rest. But one of the other allegations that the video made was that the hydrogen fuel cell was actually a big part of the reason the electric car died, because of some of the big guys, and like George W. Bush threw his weight behind hydrogen fuel cell, right? Like the federal government threw over $1 billion at trying to revolutionize, quote unquote, the car market, and it was pushed towards hydrogen fuel cell. But like we mentioned before, it really hasn't panned out. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next 5 years, and I do think we're going to see some pretty big leaps and bounds in it. But it's really when they can get the cost down. When the cost comes down, I think then people will just start snapping them up, and you can get them to work in like the more rough conditions, like so it's good for the Midwest winters and whatnot.
Well, I mean, just from my personal standpoint, that I feel like my own attitude towards electric vehicles pretty much mirrors what we've said here. Like, I love like Teslas look great; they seem like a great vehicle. I mean, I don't like their lack of quality control. I mean, it's understandable, but like, I'm just waiting for the electric Toyota Corolla. You know what I mean? Like, I'm waiting for the $25,000. I mean, in Canada. Any American's probably gagging at that price, but like for Canada, that's a good price for a Corolla. I'm waiting for the $25,000 brand new, full-featured electric sedan that I can buy off the lot, and that's not here yet. So I don't see myself buying an electric vehicle until that's here.
Yep. Same with me.
Yeah.
It's what I want is I want a decent size, like, crossover, fully electric, kind of like a RAV4 or something like that. Once that happens,
Yeah,
I'm so down for that. But again, it has to come in at the same price as I would get.
Sadly, Toyota actually used to sell a fully electric RAV4 in California as part of their,
and they crushed it.
As part of the, I've seen a few in Canada, obviously used ones, and yeah. So exactly.
In that video, like when the EV market that was about 2005 went under, they got rid of them. Like, they just started pulling them off the roads as well.
They produced an electric RAV4 as recently as I think 2014 in North America.
Absolutely.
Well, that was under a partnership, like using Tesla technology, was it not?
Yeah, I think that might have been it, and it was So I'm waiting for the day when there's competitive offerings from my preferred brands. I like Toyota, I like Honda. I want something like that. So I'll wait, and I really do hope they get on it sooner than later, because I personally don't want to buy a gas vehicle. I'm not interested. I just don't see myself wanting to buy a new one. So I might have to just get a used, piece of shit and limp it through until there's better offerings. But until then,
same.
I'm not biting.
Man, an electric vehicle with full self-driving, that's what the dream is.
Exactly. Well, yeah, that actually is kind of my thoughts. Is like I want to get through the next 5 years until I can get that, and I don't really want to
drive myself again.
Yeah, full self-driving, but even like Tesla level driver assist would be nice, to be honest. I don't think we should get too deep into self-driving. That's a whole nother topic, but a lot of the, lane change, automatic parking is just a game changer. And the one feature that, I don't know how well it works, but it was being apparently rolled out with Tesla, was parking lot drop-off and pickup.
Yeah.
So you drive up to the entrance, get out of your vehicle, your car parks itself, and then you call your car to pick you up when you're done.
Man, the times that it doesn't work is going to be so annoying. It's just going to be a mess in the parking lot, but I definitely would love that feature. All right, I got everything out that I wanted to. Is there anything else from you guys? Otherwise, we're going to go deep in the rabbit hole of auto parking.
No, I think we should call it there, and maybe we'll leave automated vehicles and solar and all that for another time, another topic.
Sounds good. Price?
Yeah, that's everything I was thinking.
Alrighty. Well, thanks everybody. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.